Hello, everyone. My name is Joey Barnett. I'm a partner at WR Immigration. I practice in EB-5 primarily, and it is my sincere pleasure to be having this time with Charlie, who's our Director of Visa Consulting. And WR Immigration is a full-service U.S. immigration firm. We also have a global component. We have hundreds of staff members and dozens of attorneys working in every specialty of immigration. And we're considered one of the top firms in the country as it relates to EB-5. This doesn't constitute any sort of legal advice today. Got to say that as a disclaimer, but we want to answer your questions, so please feel free to reach out. We'll give you some contact information at the end of the presentation. Today, July 2nd, it is wonderful to be here, and here's our roadmap for today. This one won't be too long, to be honest, but we do have some important stuff that we want to talk about, including the July 2024 Visa Bulletin and what that means for EB-5, and some data that we have received from the Department of State and from USCIS, and we're going to share what that means to you if you're an existing investor, if you're a future potential investor and you're learning more about EB-5. We're very happy to have you here. Let's go straight into it. Charlie, this is the final action date, Chart A for July 2024. We have here listed out the EB-5 visa categories. Were there any changes in the visa bulletin from last month for EB-5?
No, these dates have remained unchanged in recent months. I think that the China date, if we are lucky, it will get to January 1st of 2016 by September. I don't think it will move beyond that. And for the India date, I would actually expect the India date to move in August and or September, because so far the number use that the State Department has published on India number use is very, very low. So I would expect them to begin advancing that India unreserved date.
And we're going to be talking about why these dates haven't been advancing, at least for China, as fast as we would have potentially thought, and some of the statistics behind that next. I want to focus just for a moment on the reserved or set-aside visa categories, which remain current. And this, as we've indicated in the past, is a huge opportunity for those who are stuck in other long green card waiting lines, like an EB-2 or EB-3, or as a backup plan to remain in the country after potential layoff and restrictive grace period if you're on an H-1B or something like that, or for children who may age out based on those long processing times under EB-2 or EB-3, or really even for those who just want unrestricted work access in the United States, in as quick as 3 to 5 months after making the EB-5 investment, you're able to take advantage of the EB-5 program and the current Visa Bulletin, which allows you to file an adjustment of status at the same time that you file the EB-5 petition. And with that adjustment of status, you're also able to file and receive, as a matter of right, interim benefits such as employment authorization document and advanced parole, which give you the unrestricted right to work and live in the United States during the time in which your adjustment is pending. So that was a mouthful, but basically what I'm trying to say is that these current visa categories is a huge benefit, and it's why a lot of people are looking at EB-5 and why, as you'll see later on, we're seeing such a huge demand from EB-5. Charlie, I guess generally, what are your thoughts about any kind of final action date potentially being imposed in this fiscal year? Is there any possibility of that to happen?
No, there is absolutely no possibility of final action dates. So all three reserved categories will remain current for the remainder of fiscal 2024 and for the foreseeable future, which we'll talk about later.
Yep. And then the question really becomes, well, if and when a final action date is imposed later on, because USCIS is approving so many of the cases, well, what will the date be? And will your priority date be before that or after that? And the longer you wait to file, the more likely it will be after that final action date. That's just because others are filing beforehand, and there's a limited supply of visas in each one of these categories. Let's take a step back, though, and talk a little bit more about the unreserved. This is for pre-RIA investors or for investors that don't go into a TEA or infrastructure project. And this was very interesting data. Charlie, can you tell us, where did this data come from? Have you seen it before? And what does this tell you, I guess, in particular as it relates to mainland China?
This data was provided by Dr. Michael Henley at a recent IIUSA conference, which was held in Atlanta in May. And this is the type of chart I would routinely request from our National Visa Center when I was speaking at such conferences. And it's a very useful chart. It shows the amount of applicants with EB-5 unreserved petitions on file at the National Visa Center. And it shows the demand broken down by calendar year of priority date, which is extremely useful when trying to estimate for potential movement of future final action dates. And as you mentioned earlier, this chart shows, if you look at the China demand in calendar year 2015, 16, 17, and 18, you will see significant amounts. That's why the date has not moved so far this year, and why during fiscal 2025, it is going to move through calendar year 2016, but at which pace we're unclear at this time.
Got it. So I just want to make sure we're all clear. This is not the number of approved I-526s. This is principal investors and derivatives with cases on file at NVC, correct?
Correct. This is everybody that's on file, because each applicant, the principal and any dependents, count against the annual limit. So again, this is extremely useful information to have and to look at when you're thinking about, forward movement of the final action date, and which is why I can say already at this point that the China final action date for unreserved will be in 2016 throughout fiscal 2025.
If you don't mind, let me ask just a couple of more questions. When we talk about reducing sort of the long backlog with this bumper crop of visas because of the high annual limits, you're talking about really getting through all of these folks who are at NVC at least through 2015 and trying to take a big chunk out of that 2016 number. That's really what we're saying here, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
We currently have a very large unreserved annual limit. It's approximately 14,000 for this fiscal year. So that should take a large bite out of this demand. And the annual limit for next year will be not as large, but still significant. So we should be able to take a significant chunk out of pending cases next year as well.
Is there any reason why a number from 2016 could be reduced before a number from 2014? And I'm just trying to think about kind of your general point about acting on a case once it gets to NVC. Like, that's a possibility, right?
Yes. Because applicants, where you see demand with an earlier year, that's the applicant, for whatever reason, has not pursued final action on their case. Applicants proceed at their own convenience and pace, and then for whatever reason, they may not have acted. But again, this may indicate that they will never act in some of these cases with very early priority dates.
Interesting. And once we get through this slog of cases from 2016, I mean, that's really when EB-5 peaked in demand from China before there was, the potential for price increases or, the long waiting lines really showed up on the Visa Bulletin and people understood what that meant. Any other comments that you have about any other country here? Let's talk about, I guess, India, for example. The numbers are pushed out to like 2018, 2019, but you think we should be able to get through most of those this fiscal year, right?
I think we should be able to use approximately at least 900 numbers this fiscal year, and probably 700 to 850 range at least next fiscal year.
So all of these Indian cases will be cleared out hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years in the unreserved category for India.
Yes. So, and again, we should expect in the coming year, we should expect rapid movement of that India unreserved final action date.
Okay, great. I thought this was really helpful at the IIUSA conference, and I just wanted to take a deeper dive with you, Charlie, because I know you've seen this type of data or this type of chart in the past. I do wish this was something that they could provide publicly just from time to time, but I guess that's not on their list of things to do.
I used to provide worst case estimates on wait times for an applicant filing a petition, say, as of today. And this is the chart I would depend on, along with the information I would receive from the Immigration Service to make those predictions.
So you guys got it here, folks. You can try to pull a Charlie Oppenheim and make your own predictions because you got the same data that he does. So go for it, and we'll love to hear what you have to say. All right, speaking of data that USCIS releases or doesn't, just last week, USCIS released data related to the number of I-526 and I-526Es that have been filed since the enactment of the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act, which came into law in 2020. I stole this chart from Suzanne Lazicki at Lucid Blog, who I always give a shout out to for doing great work, and as far as I'm concerned, is required reading for anybody in the EB-5 world. She's absolutely fantastic and a great business plan writer as well. And this is on her blog that I just copied and pasted. And this far right column, the Q2 for 2024, this is the new data that was just released. And it shows a huge jump in the number of I-526s that were filed as compared to previous quarters. And I think the big reason why is because of the April 1st filing fee increase that took effect and people wanting to get their EB-5 case in before then. I imagine if there was a month-to-month breakdown among the quarters, the majority of them would show a March filing date. And that's obviously showing huge demand for the reasons why I said before, including the reserved visa opportunities, the concurrent filing, and the fact that we're actually starting to see already USCIS adjudicate these. And I believe it's about 430 I-526 or I-526Es that have been processed that were based on cases that were filed after the RIA went into enactment. So that's great to see. We've got a number of those approvals at WR Immigration. And actually, I just got my first adjustment of status case approved last week. It was Indian national in the United States on H-1B, stuck in the EB-2, EB-3 backlog. They filed, I believe it was in the summer of 2023. Their I-526 was approved last September. And just last week, so about, 9 months later, their adjustment of status was approved, and now they have their conditional green cards. And people are hearing about this, and they're seeing that, wow, this actually can take place in a lot quicker of a manner than we had thought. And I think that's why we're seeing the demand soaring right now. You know, people are going to use these numbers in any which way to try to sell EB-5 one way or the other. Charlie, what information don't we have here that we would wish USCIS could provide when they're giving us these totals?
It would be extremely beneficial if they break this down between the three reserved categories. The vast majority are likely to be in the rural and high unemployment area categories. But again, it would be beneficial if they would break it down that way and break it down by month. I can tell you, based on this large total, and I think you're spot on when you say that a lot of people were trying to beat the fee increase. Therefore, I would expect a large percentage of these cases to have been filed in March of 2024, and that would be their priority date. Therefore, whenever final action dates are required in the reserved categories, once they hit up against March of 2024, it will most likely take a considerable amount of time to go beyond that date because you're going to have a big, giant lump of cases that have to be processed.
The same way that we're seeing that right now for unreserved China in 2015.
Exactly. That's what happened in China. There was tremendous amount of filings in September of 2015, and then also in December of 2015. There were two large filings, and it took a considerable amount of time to work through them. The other thing is, although there is a large amount of these cases, these are at the back of the line, and so they will not be processed completely for a considerable amount of time.
And because of that, the visa bulletin is going to remain current, which keeps this opportunity to file your adjustment of status and get your unrestricted work authorization and your advanced parole for a limited amount of time. And this number here reflects that even though you can file your adjustment of status now, it doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be a final action date imposed at the time your I-526 is approved. Think of an I-526 as your I-140. Your I-526 needs to be approved first for them to approve the adjustment of status. But there also needs to be a visa available once the I-526 is approved in order for them to have the authority to adjudicate it in the first place. And so the opportunity that we have at this time is to file the adjustment and to get that unrestricted work authorization and the travel authorization. It would be great if they broke it down by visa category. It would be great potentially if they did it by, country of chargeability, the country that you were born in. I think it's we've seen from past data that the breakdown between high unemployment versus rural, it's different based on different countries of birth. I think we saw that, like in China, over 40% of people who did EB-5 were doing rural. At least this was through data that we had through November of 2023. Whereas for Indian nationals, it was under 1/3. So there is a difference. Have those changed? I imagine they have since then. So I don't really want to come up with any sort of assumptions on the breakdown between those. We just don't know. And because of that, I'm not going to be making any sort of real projections on what this means for, the imposition of a final action date, so difficultly. But in general, Charlie, and I guess I just want you to repeat what you said kind of previously before, what does this in general point to in terms of, backlogs and when they could be formed?
It's hard to say when they could be formed, but I think that this large total pretty much guarantees that there will be final action dates imposed at some point. I would not expect that to occur in a worst case scenario before the summer of 2025, but I would expect them to be imposed during fiscal 2026. And as you mentioned, it's important to remember a final action date should only be imposed when the amount of visa numbers which have already been used and those expected to be used in the coming months will exceed the annual limit. And right now, we've seen very minimal number use, and I would expect that the number use will actually be minimal through at least the first half of next year. And that's why I'm saying in a worst case scenario, some type of dates may be imposed in the summer of 2025. But again, as you say, you need to file. If you're considering it, file, because you always want to be as close to the front of any line when it develops. And as you mentioned, the concurrent filing benefits now, you can realize those, and that is a unique opportunity which most applicants have not had in the past.
Well, that sums it up for us today. We thank you for joining us. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. We have some QR codes up here. If you're looking at this, please feel free to reach out to us. visalaw@wolfsdorf.com. And here are the offices that we have around the world. My email is jbarnett@wolfsdorf.com. Thank you so much for listening in. Charlie, thank you for your invaluable insight. Hope you have a great July 4th weekend.
Take care.
All right. Take care.